Thank you. And our next presentation is cold form steel and LEED. And before I introduce our speaker, Brandy Sebastian, I'll have to confess I cheated. I looked ahead at some of the slides. There's a lot of interesting material in here. LEED version 4, the OLEED 2009 Life Cycle Assessment EPD. If you don't know what I'm talking about on this, I can tell you that the wood industry makes a strong case for all things environmental. And if we as an organization, even as individuals, are not fully conversant on this subject, then we only help make their case stronger. So you're going to hear a lot of really good information at the close or along the way. If you want to type questions in the question feature here, Brandy will answer a couple of them at the end. Any that don't get answered will get answered in writing, and that will go out to everyone. With that, I'll go ahead and introduce Brandy Sebastian. She is the Director of Life Cycle Assessment for the Steel Recycling Institute. That's a unit of the American Iron and Steel Institute. She is responsible for overseeing the collection of scientific evidence through LCA, that's your life cycle assessment, activities and advancing LCA practices in all markets of the steel industry. She holds a bachelor's in environmental systems engineering and a master's in energy and geo-environmental engineering from Penn State University. And with that, Brandy, it's all yours. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and thank you to SFIA for having me speak with you all today. So before we get started with the main content of the presentation, just a very quick overview of who my organization is. So I work for the Steel Recycling Institute, and yes, that is part of AISI, which is an industry association much like yours that was formed over 150 years ago. It represents the producers of steel in North America. So that's the suppliers to your product systems. And AISI works in policy, technology, and market applications for steel products. The Steel Market Development Institute, which you may have heard of, is part of AISI as well. And it works to promote and grow the use of steel in various market sectors. The Steel Recycling Institute, as the name suggests, originally started out focusing on the recycling of all steel products, but has since evolved to advance its mission, and now has a group that conducts technical sustainability research. And a lot of our studies focus on life cycle assessment and related types of assessment. And we work to provide outreach and education to the industry and its customers. So one of the ways that we work with the construction market specifically is through the Construction Sustainability Council, which we've been convening at SRI and SMDI for nearly a decade now to discuss and get feedback from the product application groups, lots of associations on various sustainability topics. One of the things that we often talk about is the threat of competition from other materials, and including wood. And we also talk about advancements in things like green building rating systems, which is what the focus of the talk is today. And actually our next meeting is just next week in Washington, D.C. So the focus today is on LEED. So this is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design Green Building Rating System. It was developed by the U.S. Green Building Council, which is a nonprofit organization that was formed in 1993. Just to quote from their mission, they want to transform the way buildings and communities are designed, built, and operated. They're looking to improve the environment and society, as well as the health of buildings and its occupants, and they ultimately want to improve the quality of life. So the first version of LEED was published in 2000, The latest version is called LEED version 4, which was kicked off at a Green Build conference in 2013. The previous version of LEED is called LEED 2009 or version 3. They extended the registration for that one a little bit because I think they got some feedback that the industry wasn't quite ready for version 4. But that version of LEED closed in June of 2015. So now the only version you can register projects under is the current one, LEED version 4. So with each new version of LEED, U.S. Green Building Council aims to really raise the bar, ultimately with the goal of moving beyond just reducing impact, so reducing the bad things that buildings cause, to actually creating benefits to the environment, which is what you can see in this graphic here. It's a pretty big aspiration. So how successful have they been? LEED is arguably the predominant green building rating program in the US, and it's expanding globally. So as of October, more than 167 countries and territories were using LEED for projects. More than 92,000 total commercial projects are participating in LEED, which means they've either registered or have become certified, and that equates to over 19 billion square feet of building space. So of the 92,000, more than 39,000 projects have been certified, so that leaves about 50,000 projects that are still going through the certification process. And as far as the uptake of the latest version of LEED, only over 1,000 of those 92,000 projects are working with the new or the latest version of LEED. So if we look at LEED's coverage in the US specifically, the two charts at the bottom show you how project registrations and certifications have grown over time, with over 30,000 certified projects currently in the US. Most of those projects, as you can see at the top, are achieving either gold or silver certification. We'll talk a little bit about what you have to do to get those levels of certification, with very few projects achieving the top-notch or the platinum certification. So the latest version of LEED, as I mentioned, they actually delayed closing the registration of the previous version because this version is very different. So what has changed from the past version to the current one? So there's a clear focus on transparency, getting information out there into the marketplace that wasn't there before, as well as performance. There's a new integrative process credit that was designed to get building owners and project managers to be thinking about LEED at the start of a construction project. There are new credit categories that look at project location and transportation, and this latest version incorporated international requirements. What is most interesting, I think, to us is that the materials and resources section of LEED was completely rewritten in this latest version to include more holistic assessment methods like whole building life cycle assessment and EPDs, as well as disclosure of chemical ingredients, so material composition, and responsible extraction of raw materials throughout product supply chains. So we'll talk about LEED and cold form steel framing more broadly than just materials and resources, but this is the most relevant section to us. So this summarizes the different credits and points that you can get in the materials and resources section. So you can see there's 13 possible points. LEED in total has 110 possible points. And along the bottom, I know it's a little difficult to see, but to get certified in LEED, you need to have at least 40 points, which is actually a pretty small amount considering the total possible points. And then that ranges up to a platinum certification, which requires 80 points. And the way that this is organized, you have prerequisites that you must meet in order to get certification, as well as optional credits that you can pick and choose to apply for in order to reach those certification levels. And I highlighted in red here that the two credits that focus specifically on LCA. And since this is the first version of the program to use LCA, I just wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about it. So life cycle assessment is a very standardized, comprehensive method to evaluate potential environmental impacts of a product, system, service, material, pretty much anything you would like to assess throughout its entire life cycle. So if you think about the steel life cycle, which is very circular because of the high levels of recycling that happen with steel products, you'd be looking at all of the potential impacts throughout that life cycle. There are 4 main steps to conducting an LCA. Arguably, the most important one is the goal and scope definition. That's where you figure out what it is you want to study. So what does your product life cycle look like? And what are your system boundaries and things of that nature. And then once you know what you are studying, you then conduct an inventory analysis. That's where you collect data on energy, material consumption, emissions, waste, how much material is being recycled. And you do that for every step in the life cycle that you're looking at. Once you have your data collected, the next thing you do is you assess for impact. So you look at all of the emission and waste flows and determine which impacts they cause and what the magnitude of those impacts are. And interpretation is something that happens throughout. It's really just to double check that you're on the right track and your system boundaries are set properly and your data quality is high enough in your study. So this just shows the metrics, or what we call indicators, that represent potential environmental impacts. The ones that are in the table on the left are the ones that are most commonly reported in LCAs. So at the top you have global warming potential, and that's the one that looks at aggregated greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the effect those emissions would have on warming the atmosphere on the planet. And then ozone depletion potential looks at emissions that have the effect of depleting the ozone layer, causing a hole in the ozone layer. Acidification potential looks at emissions that cause acid rain once they're released into the atmosphere. Smog potential looks at emissions that form ground level ozone or smog. And then eutrophication potential is nutrient emissions to air and water that then deposit on the land or in waterways, and they cause things like algal blooms that are a big issue. There are additional impacts. We often, in our line of work, promote that when you're looking at a comprehensive product, you should consider all relevant environmental impacts. The 2 that I'll point out are land use change and biodiversity impacts, or habitat disruption. Those are particularly important for things like wood products, but they're often ignored in wood product LCAs. So LCA is incorporated into LEED at the whole building level and also at the product level. The building life cycle impact reduction credit includes a few different options as it's incorporated into the program. The first 2 options you can see on the screen involve building reuse. So you're looking at reusing historic or renovated or abandoned buildings instead of building new ones. Option 3 is looking at building reuse, but also material reuse, and you can earn points based on how much existing materials you reuse in your buildings. So we like to promote steel in this way because steel products are durable. They have a long useful lifetime. They lend themselves well to disassembly and reuse. And not only that, their steel allows for adaptable buildings, so you can have long spans, large column-free spaces that can be used for different purposes in the future. The whole building life cycle assessment option is at the very end in this credit, and you can get 3 points by conducting an entire life cycle assessment of a building. So if you think about creating all of the products that go into the building, assembling the building, using the building for its entire life, disassembling it, and then disposing of or recycling all those materials. There are 2 different commercial software tools that are mentioned specifically in LEED for this purpose. And we as SRI, AISI, we have been collecting life cycle inventory data for steel production that is represented in both of those products, making it easy for, or as easy as possible for designers to complete the LCA process for steel products. So regarding or at the product level, LEED has a credit for environmental product declarations. Those are essentially summary documents that report LCA results for individual products. The intent here, they claim they want to reward project teams for selecting products with verified improved environmental life cycle impacts. So the way this works, there are two options. The first one is really just disclosure. So as long as you have, the way this works, it's simply having an EPD available for the products that are used in the building. And it doesn't really matter what the EPDs say or what the results indicate for those specific products. This is just simply about disclosing the impacts. To get the 1 point for this credit, you have to have 20 different EPDs from at least 5 manufacturers. And it's important to note, we'll talk a little bit more specifically about EPDs. The industry-wide EPDs that summarize an EPD for a specific product in a region only count as half a product for this calculation. So if you were looking at all industry-wide EPDs, you would need 40 instead of 20 to get the point here. There's another option in LEED under this credit, and this is actually where they start looking at performance. So if your products that are being used in the building, if you can demonstrate that through a manufacturer-specific EPD that those products have lower impacts than the industry average, you can get an additional point through this. And this is it's a bit of a different, instead of just having a certain number of EPDs, you actually have to do a cost calculation based on the total cost of the building. So it's a little bit different there. And I'll also point out that there's something called a location valuation factor. And this shows up in several different credits in LEED. And I have a couple slides to explain what that is. But essentially, if you have a product that's sourced from very close by, you get to double the value of that product. So several of you are likely familiar with this development process here, but I just wanted to explain that the development of an EPD follows a very structured process that's standardized by ISO. The first step is to develop a set of product category rules, and this is a set of rules for a very specific product type that tells you how you conduct your LCA and what information needs to be reported in your EPD. As I mentioned, steel inventory data is the data that feeds into the LCA analysis. And then the EPD is just the summary of the impacts, the LCA results for that specific product. All of this is guided by what is called a program operator, and there are various stages of review and verification that have to happen throughout the process. So we published an industry-wide EPD for cold form steel studs and track nearly 2 years ago, amazingly. I think several of you on the call were probably involved in this process. Our current EPD does not expire until 2021. However, we are collecting all new life cycle inventory data for steel production this year. So we may choose to update it a little early in the event that the data, as we expect, will show reduced environmental impacts for steel. So stay tuned for that. And in fact, over the last 2 to 3 years, there have been industry-wide EPDs published for nearly every major steel construction product that is used today. And we have a full list of these EPDs available on our website. It's on both the Steel Recycling Institute and the SMDI website. So folks that are seeking out materials for LEED projects can easily see that we have these available. And as I mentioned, LEED has this aspect built into it called location valuation factor, and it's really just a regional multiplier. So this applies to several different credits in LEED, and it really adds value when you have products that meet very stringent criteria. So products and materials to get this multiplier must be extracted, manufactured, and purchased within 100 miles of the project. So this distance is like a radius, and it's measured as the crow flies, not as the truck transports the materials. So I have a graphic here on the next slide to illustrate this, and I'm sorry that the text is a little bit small. This comes right from the LEED reference guide. But as you can see, this is an example of a concrete product, and the radius, the 100-mile radius, is that dotted circle there in the center, which actually looks like it's circling Pittsburgh, interestingly, which is where I'm located. But you can see here that several of the processes that are part of making concrete are outside of the radius. So silica extraction, Portland cement manufacturing, gravel extraction, lime extraction. So according to the LEED criteria, this particular product would not qualify for that multiplier. So one of the things we've done, because there's a lot of detail in this rating program, and we think steel is a particularly good material for LEED projects, we have developed a fact sheet that we published recently for all steel construction products and as they pertain to LEED. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but at steelsustainability.org you can find a copy of this fact sheet, and I'll just go through pretty quickly the parts of LEED that we haven't discussed already, where cold form steel framing is particularly useful. So the first is another part of the materials and resources section. There's both a prerequisite and a credit that pertain to construction and demolition waste management. And as you all know, steel is highly recyclable, so it's also manufactured at very precise specifications. So not only does it reduce job site waste, but all of that, what they would consider waste in LEED, can be easily and economically recycled, so it easily achieves these points. We already talked about the building life cycle and in product life cycle credits. Those are covered in the fact sheet as well. And then there are some credits that look at the sourcing of raw materials. So the intent here is to reward the use of products that are verified to have been extracted or sourced in a responsible manner. And there's some criteria to explain what that means. But in practice, this just requires that companies that produce these products and materials report their practices throughout their supply chain. And this can be done using something like a corporate sustainability report or corporate social responsibility report. And several North American steel companies publish reports that address this. There is another option under this credit, and this is where the recycled content credit is buried. It used to be really prominent in LEED version 3, so LEED 2009, but now it's buried in this credit here. So it wants you to use products that contain recycled content. It also looks at or applies to products with take-back programs. Wood products get a pass here as well. And interestingly, and I think importantly, LEED, steel is the only material that has a minimum recycled content allowed in LEED. So without any additional documentation, you can claim a 25% minimum post-consumer recycled content for LEED. If you want to claim a higher percentage, you actually have to go to your supplier for a specific manufacturer-specific letter for recycled content documentation. Another credit in the materials and resources section looks at material ingredients. So this is a really big push lately. If you've been to Greenbuild or any of the construction sustainability trade shows, it's disclosure of material chemical composition, material ingredients, and associated risks and hazards. So you can achieve this credit by having a publicly available inventory of all ingredients in the product by CAS number. You can also conduct one of the specific health declarations that are the programs that are out there, like health product declarations or cradle to cradle. Declare labels are also accepted in LEED. So this is something we're keeping a close eye on because we're seeing a lot of interest in this area. And we're starting to see some steel products coming out with these type of certifications and labels. And then outside the materials and resources section, LEED has several other topic areas, and steel products, cold form steel framing, qualifies for some of these other categories. So for an example, the sustainable sites category, they're looking at site development, so specifically protecting or restoring habitat around project locations. And in the fact sheet, we talk about how the prefabrication or panelization of steel products minimizes on-site disturbances. And then in energy and atmosphere, this is one of the largest sections of LEED. There's both a prerequisite and a credit that talk about energy performance. So because they're looking at a building as an entire system, this is a somewhat indirect contribution, but still an important one. So in our fact sheet, we talk about how steel framing is dimensionally stable and with proper design can contribute to a very tight building envelope that can meet or exceed the energy performance requirements in LEED. And this is my last slide. Just a heads up or a coming soon. It seems, just when you get a handle on things, they evolve or change on you. But at Greenbuild this year, USGBC announced that it's piloting a new version of LEED in 2018. This is version 4.1, so it's not a complete rewrite. They're trying to smooth over some of the rough spots, so they say. So they'll be focusing on building performance. They also want to harmonize credits across different systems, so new construction versus residential construction versus healthcare. They have different thresholds, and they're working to harmonize that. But they're also going to revamp some of the credits that we've talked about today. And this is largely because the achievement rates for those credits have been really low. So the life cycle impact reduction credit we talked about, this is the one that encourages building material reuse and life cycle assessment for buildings. Of the products that have been certified, only 27% have met this credit. The sourcing of raw materials one, which talks about extraction practices, nobody has achieved that one. So, and then the material ingredients credit, where they're asking for you to disclose the chemical composition of your products, only 17% have met that one. So I think it sounds like they're gonna try to improve the rating system to address some of those issues. And that was a lot of detail in a short amount of time. So if you have questions, I'll happily answer them now, or I'll take them and respond to them after the meeting.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Brandy. Mark, did you have some questions come in?
Yeah, we have a question. We have just one of them so far. Many architectural firms have a director of sustainability. What 2 or 3 points should I discuss with that person when comparing CFS to wood?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, please use our fact sheet. It's full of great resources. But I think the key points when comparing to wood are, the durability, adaptability. We say steel doesn't warp, rot, or crack. So it's the very practical things. The fire resistance argument is a very good one. Yeah, I would say those are the kind of things that you can bring forward as tangible arguments.
Okay, and then let's take one more so we have a chance to show the video that is still on the agenda. What's the difference between the product specific versus a type 3 product specific EPD?
Yeah, so there's 3 types in LEED. The first one is a manufacturer specific, so that would be a specific company creates their own EPD. There's industry-wide EPD, And that's the one where, you know, the industry associations come together and they publish what would be considered an average product on the marketplace. And that only counts as half a point in LEED. And then there's a third option, and that's really like a disclosure. It's like an LCA report for a product. So it's not really an EPD. It's like a critically reviewed LCA report for a product, and that only counts as a quarter of a product. So if you were to take that approach, you would need, you know, 4 times the number of documents as you would manufacturer-specific EPDs.